If you think your WA is bad, wait until you hear how one power-hungry Karen tried to force me into her private lake association, called the cops on me when I refused, and nearly fainted when she learned who I really was. Stick around to the end, this story gets wild fast. And if you love insane real-life revenge stories like this, make sure to subscribe for more. The mess started the day I moved into my quiet lakeside property, excited for peace and quiet after years of working undercover for a federal agency, thinking the most dangerous thing I'd encounter from now on would be the occasional raccoon staring me down at 2 a.m., but oh no, fate had something else in store for me in the form of Karen, the self-appointed president for life of the Lakeshore Serenity WA, which, as I later discovered, didn't even legally include my property, but that didn't stop her from marching across my dock with the swagger of a dictator inspecting conquered land. She introduced herself with a tone so smug it could curdle milk and announced that as the new resident, I owed immediate back dues, lake maintenance fees, dock taxes, community, serenity assessments, and something called a water enjoyment levy, which sounded less like an HOA fee and more like a medieval torture charge. And when I told her politely that my deed explicitly stated my property was outside any WA jurisdiction, her eyes narrowed like she had discovered a national enemy, and she said, "Everyone with lake access must join, no exceptions," and I responded, "Ma'am, you have no authority here," which is apparently the WA Karen equivalent of lighting a match near gasoline, because she puffed up like an enraged rooster and declared, "If you refuse, the WA will take corrective measures," and I, trying not to laugh, asked her what those measures were. She said, "You'll see," before stomping away like a medieval villain who had just vowed revenge on a knight. I thought that was the end of it, but 2 days later, I woke up to find bright orange WA violation notices duct taped to my front door, mailbox, gate, and, bizarrely, my kayak, all filled with threats of fines for unauthorized lake use, non-compliant vegetation, unapproved roof color, and failure to demonstrate community spirit. And I was still reading those absurdities when Karen arrived with 2 clipboard-carrying WA enforcers, looking like she was leading a SWAT operation against a dangerous criminal. She pointed at me dramatically and announced, "You are in violation of Section 14A, mandatory membership," and I calmly repeated that my property wasn't part of her dictatorship, but she insisted, "If you live near the lake, you're part of the HOA, it's common sense." And I explained that the world doesn't run on her common sense, it runs on legal paperwork, but she didn't care, and when I told her to leave my property, she said, "I'm calling the police, let's see what they say," and stomped away again. I should have guessed she wasn't bluffing because 20 minutes later, 2 local officers pulled up, lights flashing like they were responding to a bank robbery, and Karen came running out waving her arms like she had summoned divine reinforcements, shouting, "That's him. That's the man refusing to comply with association law." The officers approached me, and I remained calm, hands visible, fully cooperating because unlike Karen, I don't create drama. One officer asked, "Sir, the WA reported a disturbance," and I explained the situation, showing them my deed with highlighted paragraphs proving I wasn't part of the WA, and they both nodded understandingly, clearly realizing they'd been dragged into nonsense. But Karen, not satisfied, started shrieking, "Arrest him! Arrest him for obstruction of the HOA!" And one officer said gently, "Ma'am, that's not a thing," and she screeched back, "It is to me," and tried to physically shove her way in front of the officers to point at my dock like it was incriminating evidence. Then came the moment everything changed. She snapped, "If you don't arrest him, I'll report all of you," and tried to snatch the paperwork from the officer's hand, and that's when the situation escalated because she grabbed the officer's wrist. "Big mistake," he warned her to step back, and she shouted, "He's a danger to the community. He threatened me," and that was the moment I sighed, pulled out my wallet, and flipped open my federal badge, simply saying, "Ma'am, stop lying," and the second she saw it, her face drained so fast it was like someone pulled the plug on her blood supply. She stumbled back, pointing at me, stuttering, wait, you're," and I said, "Yes. Federal. And I don't appreciate false reports." The officers stiffened respectfully. Karen wobbled like she might faint. The WA enforcers suddenly became very interested in their shoes, and the dramatic silence that followed was glorious. But the story didn't end there, not even close. Karen, terrified now, tried to laugh it off, saying, "Oh, I didn't know. This was just a misunderstanding. A friendly community check-in," which was a hilarious lie considering the stack of violation notices still taped to my kayak, and I pointed toward them, asking, "Friendly?" And she squeaked like a squeezed rubber duck, "Just new resident welcome paperwork. And the officers exchanged a look that said, "Lady, please stop," but she kept digging her grave saying, "The WA just wants order. Rules, structure. Without us, everything would fall apart." And I replied, "Then maybe follow the law first," and she gulped so loudly it echoed off the lake. The officers confirmed I was completely in the right, warned Karen about filing false reports, and left after apologizing for the inconvenience, but Karen, being Karen, didn't stop. Instead, she tried a new strategy: intimidation by bureaucracy. Over the next week, she attempted to fine me for having a boat she didn't approve, having bushes she didn't approve, having a paint color she didn't approve, having wind chimes she didn't approve, and existing in a manner she didn't approve. I collected every absurd violation, photographed everything, documented every harassment incident, and when she escalated by trespassing onto my property at 6 a.m. to inspect my backyard, I finally activated the trap I had been preparing: a full legal and federal level complaint involving harassment, impersonation of authority, misuse of emergency services, and violation of property rights, complete with timestamped audio, video, witness accounts, and her own written nonsense. The day she received notice of the investigation, neighbors told me they heard her scream so loudly it scared their dogs. Overnight, the WA board, who previously trembled under her tyranny, turned on her like piranhas, accusing her of putting them all at risk. By the next emergency meeting, she was voted out, banned from the WA leadership, fined heavily for her actions, and forced to send me a written apology letter so passive-aggressive it could be used as a weapon, featuring phrases like, "I regret any possible inconvenience that may have arguably occurred," but the best part came later when several neighbors quietly admitted that my actions liberated them from years of her bullying, and they threw a small lakeside barbecue in my honor, jokingly calling me the man who defeated the WA Queen. Karen moved away months later, apparently claiming the atmosphere had become toxic meaning people finally had boundaries, but the neighborhood thrived afterward, and as for me, I finally enjoyed the peaceful lake life I originally wanted, sitting on my dock, fishing pole in hand, knowing that even though I left federal fieldwork behind, sometimes justice still finds its way to my doorstep, except this time, justice involved a Karen, an illegal WA power grab, and one very well-timed flash of a federal badge.